Knitted by Whitney YouTube channel. It is Valentine's Day and I have a very special pattern roundup for you. This has been a highly requested pattern roundup and I have been promising it for a while and now it's finally here. This is my top 30 size-inclusive patterns for men or for the masculine presenting person in your life. I have been asked to do this pattern roundup many times and I've been promising it's coming, I promise. And I am finally delivering on that promise. Now, in my own searches for patterns for men, it has been challenging to find really good ones that are size inclusive. So that's why this list has taken quite a while to put together. And I feel like I've done a really good job of offering a wide variety of styles of patterns. I'm going to break down my list. I know 30 is a lot of patterns. So I'm going to be breaking down my list. I'm going to be doing pullovers, cardigans, texture, color work, and then a separate section at the end that is what I would call the really advanced ones, the ones that require the most work, the ones that the person has to be very knit-worthy to deserve. So let's kick off this video by talking about what makes a knit-worthy person, because I know bringing up this list of patterns is also going to put the little worm in the back of our brain saying, but what about the sweater curse? If you haven't heard about it, what used to be called the boyfriend sweater curse, but is now gender neutrally referred to as the sweater curse, is an idea that if you start making a sweater for your partner, they will leave you before you finish the project. And I myself was, I kind of believe this for a while. So I didn't knit my now husband a sweater until after he proposed. I just really didn't want to risk it because I love him so much. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how ridiculous I was, because if your partner is the right person for you, they would never leave you because you're knitting them a sweater. It's so ridiculous. I have seen firsthand and amongst some of my other friends in the fiber community that there are people out there that blow the sweater curse out of the water, and they prove that it is completely unfounded and ridiculous, because if you've chosen the right person for you and if you are with somebody who really deeply cares about you and loves you, they're going to appreciate the fact that you have spent, in some cases, months knitting them a sweater. So the sweater curse, if you have the right partner for you, nothing to worry about. So let's talk about what makes somebody knit-worthy. First and foremost, that person has to be somebody that you know will appreciate the time, the energy, the commitment that goes into making a sweater. Second, it has to be somebody who you know will take good care of the item once you gift it to them. Are they somebody who is going to take that 100% wool sweater that you spent months making and toss it in the dryer and destroy it? Take that into consideration. The next thing I think about when I'm wondering if somebody is knit-worthy is, will they actually wear the item that I knit them? A lot of time and effort is going into making this item. I don't want it to then just sit in a drawer for the rest of the time that the person owns it. That, kind of defeats the purpose of making them something. And then the last thing, which is kind of related to the third thing, is, are they going to be proud to wear what I've made them? So when it comes to Doyle and this sweater that I made him, every time he wears it, he gushes about it and he just struts proud as a peacock, so showing me that he's wearing his sweater, and he's like, check out this sweater my wife knit me, because he's always, teasing me and doing things like that. And it just makes me feel so happy to see him wear it and to see how proudly he wears it. He knows the effort that went into it, and he knows how special the yarn is. It was also a very expensive yarn when I bought it. And he just feels very proud that he's wearing something that I made, and he's very proud of me and my skills and everything. So those are the criteria that I think about when I want to know if somebody is knit worthy. So if you are thinking about knitting something for somebody in your life, whether it is a romantic partner or a friend or a family member, think about these things. And if you are in doubt about any of those 4 things, maybe don't make them a sweater. If you do want to test the waters, start off with something small that won't take very long and won't take very much yarn, like a hat or something like that. So when I was putting this list together, I tried my best to find patterns that are actually graded for men's body types, but there are some that are considered unisex patterns or gender neutral patterns. And I only chose patterns that, if they were gender neutral, they had at least one sample shown of it on a male body so that you can see what it will look like on a male body if you want to knit this for a man or a male presenting person in your life. So in my breakdown of how I've organized the patterns on this list, yes, I've divided them into different sections such as pullovers, cardigans, texture, etc. But in those sections, I've also listed these patterns in my opinion, easiest to more difficult. So when I get to each new section, the earlier the pattern is mentioned, the easier I believe it to be. Now, of course, everything is subjective. You might find a technique more challenging than I find it, and you might consider something that I list as slightly easier as maybe something that's a little more difficult, but I've done my best to sort of create this gradation of easy to hard because I know that there are going to be knitters of many different experience levels watching this video, and I know there are a lot of beginners out there, and I wanted to show them that you can start off simple and get yourself up to something that is more challenging. It just takes time and experience and trying new things. So that being said, let's go into this list of patterns, starting with Biblo File 3 by Alicia Plummer. Alicia Plummer is one of my favorite size-inclusive designers. I have listed her patterns many times in my pattern roundups, and Biblo File 3 is one that I really love. It is a simple pullover stockinette sweater. And I feel like this is a really great one to start with if you are just dipping your toe into doing garments and you want to make a garment for a person in your life. I really feel like this is a great pattern to start with because it's a top-down raglan, knit in the round. There's no seaming, nothing fancy. I think the only, what I would call technique that you really need to do is the folded collar, which I have not done a folded collar. I know it was really simple. There are videos out there that will help you if you don't know how to do one. It's very, very simple. And I love the shape of this sweater. I think it's very, very classic. This is just like a sweatshirt, but in knitted form. So I think this is a great option if you're just starting out. Now, the next pattern that I'm going to share looks eerily similar to the Biblo File 3, but it is different. It is the Cozy Crewneck Sweater by Callie Reedy. Now, the reason that I've included both of these patterns is, first of all, they're knit on different sized yarns with completely different gauges, but there's also a difference in the construction. The Biblo File starts off knitting flat and then is joined in the round to create that higher back and then the lower neckline for comfort. The Cozy Crewneck Sweater actually is done entirely in the round and uses short rows, which are a little trickier than starting flat and then joining in the round. If you've never done short rows before, they can seem intimidating, but honestly, they're very simple once you start. Patterns are usually quite good at explaining them, and it really helps with the fit of your sweater, which is why I also included this sweater in my pattern roundup. My next pattern on this list has one of the most extensive sizing ranges on this list, and that is because it goes from child sizes all the way up to adult sizes, and this is Cribbage by Osa Bushta. I do apologize if I pronounce that incorrectly. I really, really love this sweater. This is a Henley style sweater, and I'm a big fan of that style of sweater for anybody, but I really think it looks really good on men. It's something that I think is back to when I was in high school and I was having crushes on boys, and that was the style of shirt that a lot of guys my age were wearing. That and polo shirts, but polo shirts don't do it for me. But a Henley does. I really love the button band on the top of the sweater. I think it's really stylish. It's a great little detail, and it's not that challenging to do. So this one is a unisex sweater, but there are notes in the pattern that tell you what to do for if you're fitting it to a man's body versus a woman's body. It's a great classic sweater. It's one that has that little bit of detail, but for the most part, you're doing some stockinette, and I really love this sweater. It's one of my favorites on this list. The next pattern on my list is the Hurricane Ridge Pullover by Allison Griffith. Who doesn't love a good shawl collar? It's such a great detail on a sweater. Really brings in that like professor vibe. And I think it looks super cozy, especially in this gorgeous brown yarn. I love that. This is another pattern that is unisex. However, there are a few examples in the projects of men who have made or are wearing this sweater, and I think it fits them really, really nicely. So that is why I have this one on my list. The next pattern on my list is the Hot Toddy Hoodie by Neato. Neato is one of my favorite designers, and I love that she's also a Canadian designer. She does have mainly women's wear patterns. However, she's been inserting a few menswear patterns into her lineup as well, because she's been making a lot of knitwear for her husband, Todd, who models all of the knits, and who inspired the name of this sweater, the Hot Toddy Hoodie. I really love this hoodie. I think there's some really lovely details to it, especially those slip stitch details along the back of the sweater and on the sleeves. But I also appreciate that it doesn't have the front kangaroo pocket, which, yes, very handy, very useful. I know whenever I wear a hoodie, I'm always sticking stuff in my front pocket. But I think it just makes this look a little classier not having the front pocket. And it also makes it a little easier than other hoodies because you don't have to do the front pocket, which would involve some more intricate work with the pattern. So I think this is a great one. I also love that if your significant other or the person that you're knitting for doesn't typically wear knitwear, but you want to knit them something that they would be able to wear and be cozy and be comfortable, this is a great option because it's mimicking a sweatshirt, it's mimicking a hoodie. So if your person that you're knitting for wears hoodies all the time, this would be a great option to sort of introduce them to knitwear. So that ends the first section of patterns on this list, and those were all relatively intro level pullovers. Now I'm going to share a couple intro cardigans, starting with Unplugged by Hook Mountain Handmade. This is such a cozy cardigan, and I love the way that they've styled it for the model. It looks like someone that you would find at an unplugged music session, right? And it's probably where the name came from. But I really love it because this is another very simple, classic style cardigan. It's something that if you're trying to introduce the person you're knitting to wearing knitwear for the first time, this is a great way to start them in because it's something that's just going to be a cozy layer on top, something that they could just pull out and wear if they wanted a cozy layer instead of wearing like a zip-up hoodie or a robe or something like that. I really love it for that aspect. My next pattern on this list is also one of my favorites on this list. It is the Gigi Cardigan by Neato. Yes, she's making another appearance. This has got to be one of my favorite patterns because I love that old professor grandpa style cardigan. I think it's so cozy. It looks fabulous on all bodies, regardless of size, shape, gender, whatever. So I'm currently working on this sweater for Doyle. I knitted him a sweater last year. I wanted to knit him, well, two years ago now, I think. But I wanted to knit him a cardigan. I've been meaning to make this cardigan for him for a while, and I'm finally working on it, but I will talk more about that in my next podcast episode. But I just have to gush about this pattern. I think it's one of my favorite patterns of all time. One of the things I really love about it is the way it's constructed. This is a top-down seamless sweater, and you might think that you would have to join that shawl collar later on and knit that on after doing the body. No. That shawl collar is knit all the way through the project. It's one of the more exciting constructions that I've done that has really made me sit up and say, oh, I like this. This is very fun. So that's something that I really love about this pattern. You don't have to go back and add that collar afterwards. It's done at the same time as the rest of the sweater. I also just think this is such a cozy looking sweater. It's definitely one that Doyle is going to enjoy wearing, and I can't wait to finish it so he can wear it. So those are the 2 cardigans that I had for this list of patterns. The next section that I'm going to be doing is on texture, and I've divided it into pullovers and cardigans. So we're going to start with some textured pullovers, starting with another pattern that I cannot wait to make for Doyle and for myself. It is the Stick Season sweater by Rebecca Clow of the Cribbage. Now this pattern recently got a revamp because Rebecca just included another section of instructions for the pattern that really help you fine-tune how to fit it to a male body. And I'm really excited to use the tools that she's now included in the pattern to make it fit Doyle perfectly. I could have done it before, but she just included even more info to make it completely simple to follow, and I really appreciate that. I also just love the details of this sweater, that stick pattern across the front, of course, but also the shaping to the arms and that faux seam down the sides. It's just stunning. And I'm currently working on one of Rebecca's other patterns right now, and I'm finding myself thrilled at how well it fits and how well she makes things for size inclusive bodies. That's something that I have always appreciated about Rebecca since she started releasing patterns last year, is that she's committed to being fully size inclusive, and she knows what she needs to do to make those sizes fit all bodies. It's one thing to say you have a pattern that goes up to a 60-inch bust or more. It's another thing to know that even those sizes at the very top of the range fit the body just as well as the smaller sizes on smaller bodies. And that is something that I'm so appreciative of as a plus size knitter. And that's why I can't wait to make this pattern for both Doyle and myself. I originally thought that this year would be the year that I would knit these 2 sweaters for us. The pattern just came out, I think, in November of 2023, just passed. But I've had some other projects that have come up, and I have needed to pivot and do different things. So maybe this will be a 2025 project. The next pattern on my list is Justin's Flannel by Alicia Plummer. Yes, Alicia makes another appearance as well. There are some designers that I know I can rely on to make very well-fitting size-inclusive patterns. So I tend to use their patterns over and over again. And also their designs are just awesome. Speaking of Justin's Flannel, I really love the texture of this. I think it's really cool how she's mimicking a waffle knit sweater or like a waffle knit thermal layer. I just think it's a great way to take inspiration from something that is not knitted and make it knitted. I just think it's really, really nice. And of course, I love that it is so nicely fitted. This is another one that is graded specifically for a male body type, and I just love it. The next pattern on my list is Obersee by the Blue Mouse. This is a pattern that looks very similar to Justin's Flannel, but it is a little different because it uses a different textured stitch pattern. I feel like this is the fancier cousin to the Justin's Flannel. Justin's Flannel feels more of like the sweater that you wear while you're chopping wood out back. This is the one that you wear when you go out for drinks. I think both of them serve excellent purposes, but I think this one is a little bit elevated because of that textured stitch, and it's super cool. And textured stitches are something that I think newer knitters kind of shy away from because they feel that it's going to be more challenging. But really, a lot of these repeating texture patterns get you into a groove, and you find your groove very quickly. And once you do, it's almost like that one more row mentality, because some of them have like 2 or 3 or 4 rows to create that stitch repeat. And it almost is like reaching the next chapter in a book. You just want to keep reading to get to the chapter, and then you're like, oh, well, I'm so close, I might as well read another chapter. And it just kind of helps the project move along because you're seeing these progressions so quickly, and I really enjoy that. Speaking of a texture stitch that gets you into a groove, the next pattern on my list is the Neato Pullover by Jared Flood for Brooklyn Tweed. This is a brioche sweater. Now I know brioche sounds scary and it looks really scary, but I promise once you get going, it is so soothing and so therapeutic. It is definite TV knitting. People think it's not, but it really is because it's a very rhythmic stitch. It's a very repetitive stitch. Once you get it, you've got it. The only suggestion I would make for brioche is use lifelines because undoing that sucker is horrible. So I do recommend using lifelines, but otherwise brioche is lovely and it just creates this really squishy ribbed texture that is lovely. And I particularly like the Neato sweater, or the Neato pullover rather, because of the way the brioche stitches fit around the different parts of the sweater, particularly around the crew neck. I just think seeing those lines just smoothly move around the shape, it reminds me of a river moving around rocks. It's just a very beautiful image and it's a very smooth and rhythmic look to it, and it looks so stylish. So I will always, always love a brioche sweater. Now I know it's a lot of work to make them and it takes twice as much time because you're doing every row twice, but you have to admit the result is worth it. It's so squishy, it's so lovely. So I love this pattern. The next pattern on my list is Sawyer by Julie Hoover for Brooklyn Tweed. Now, I'm including this one because, yes, it's a Henley style again, but this time a textured Henley with a gorgeous moss stitch. But I also included this sweater for a funny reason. I once had a crush on a guy named Sawyer. He was one of the kindest people I had ever met. I knew him when I went to school out in BC for my master's, and he was always just a friend. Like, we never got romantic or anything, but I always had a crush on him because he was a Southern gentleman. He just had these very Southern gentleman manners, and oh my gosh, how could you not fall in love with that? Like, he was just so sweet and so kind. He also was one of the nicest people that I've ever met. And when I see this sweater, I think, yeah, that would look really good on him. It would look good on a lot of men, but like, when I see that, plus it's called Sawyer, I think of this guy that I had a crush on. So yeah, I was inspired to include this pattern because of this guy I had a crush on named Sawyer, but also because it is a gorgeous textured Henley sweater and I really, really love it. So there's your funny little anecdote for this pattern roundup. The next pattern on my list is the Bay Point sweater by Chinoa Chin Matthews, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. If not, I do apologize. I really love this sweater because it involves texture, but it also involves this really fun fold over collar. It's not quite a shawl collar, but I think it's a really lovely detail that provides a point of interest to look at on the sweater. And I just think it looks super great on the variety of body types that they've shown in the sample photos. I've included a photo with someone knitting one of the larger sizes. However, there are other sample photos that show it on a much smaller person. And I really love that it looks awesome on both of them. I really feel like that should be the hallmark of a size-inclusive sweater, is not only does it fit a variety of sizes, it also looks pretty freaking cool on all of those sizes. So that's partly why I chose this pattern, but I also chose it because it has a beautiful stitch pattern. This one I think is done with twisted stitches, twisted ribbing, which, yeah, that's a lot of work, man. But you get this really beautiful result, so it's hard to hate the process when you get such a beautiful result. Now let's look at a couple textured cardigans. The first of which is Ranger, again by Jared Flood for Brooklyn Tweed. Jared Flood is another pattern designer that he knits some really beautiful patterns, and I have a couple of them on this list because They are just awesome patterns. This is one that I love because it reminds me of Logan Huntsberger from Gilmore Girls. Yes, I am a Logan stan. To be fair though, I don't think any of Rory's boyfriends were good. I also don't think Rory is a good person, but that's for another video. Actually, I do have another video of that. I've done a pattern roundup of patterns inspired by characters from Gilmore Girls. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link below. And I included some menswear patterns on that list. But I absolutely love this cardigan. I think it's a really great relaxed style, especially if you're knitting a sweater for somebody who maybe doesn't have sweaters in their wardrobe yet and you're trying to introduce them to sweaters. This is a great one because it's a very classic style that is going to fit nicely into their wardrobe and maybe encourage them to wear more sweaters. The second textured cardigan on my list is the Wandering Cardi by Jean-Philippe Cliché. And I hope I pronounced that correctly. Jean-Philippe is a Montreal-based knitwear designer, so he's another Canadian designer on this list, which I love to include if I can. And I stumbled across this pattern last year, I think it was, because he used the Wandering Flock yarn, which is, oh my goodness gracious, that is some of the most beautiful yarn I've ever seen. It is neon pastels. Geraldine is a wizard when it comes to yarn and color and dyes. I don't know how she does it, but it's beautiful. I actually have some of her yarn in my stash that was gifted to me by a friend, and I am just waiting for the perfect pattern to use it for. But in the meantime, here is another pattern that was made using her yarn, and I think this is a great cardigan. I really love the texture that Jean-Philippe created on this pattern. It's kind of like a block texture because there are wide columns of knits that are divided by purl rows, and then they're also crossed horizontally by purl rows that I just think creates this really cool stitch pattern. It does kind of remind me of like an academic style cardigan, like a professor cardigan, albeit a little bit differently. And I just think there's so many lovely details to this pattern. However, some of them are time-consuming details, such as the double knit button band, which I've seen other knitters make that it takes forever, but it has a beautiful finish to it. So I think this is a great option. I just think this is also a really nice way of showing off what could be a very colorful yarn, but in a very masculine way. So what's fun about this pattern is that it is knit using two strands. It uses a DK weight and a mohair. But what I love about it is that it's the mohair that's the fun color, and it's the DK that is more of the plain gray color. And I love how the mohair just lightens up that gray DK weight yarn, and it just looks super cool. But it also kind of makes it more wearable. I know myself personally, I love bright colors and I have no problem wearing bright colors, but there are other people out there who maybe don't want to wear bright colors. However, they love buying brightly colored yarn and knitting with brightly colored yarn. Because let's face it, it's really fun to look down and see all these cool colors, but it's also not necessarily something that people wear in their everyday wardrobe. So that's why I think this is a great pattern. Now let's move on to a couple cable knit sweaters. So these are kind of tacked on to the end of the textured sweaters, but I wanted to kind of separate them a bit because cable knits are just a bit more elevated than a textured stitch. Starting with Mahakam by Rachel Brockman. Now this is a free pattern, and this is the pattern that started this entire list of patterns. So I knew when I was looking at patterns for my other size inclusive pattern roundup videos, I was finding the odd men's pattern, but this was the first one that I found. And this one kind of had me start my bundle on Ravelry, and it helped me sort of plant the seed of collecting menswear patterns. And this is one of my favorite ones. I love this faux cable. It's not quite a cable, so that's why it's the first one in this cable section. It's kind of bridging the gap between texture and cables because you're not actually cabling, you're creating this faux cable look with that textured stitch on the front of the sweater. And I just think it's super cool. It's a great way to sort of get into that style of knitting if you haven't done it before, but still get a really cool result. And yes, there are some side cables on the side, but those are going to be easier to tackle than an all over front cable, which would use a chart. These would be a little easier to handle if you're just dipping your toe into doing cables. Now, if you follow me on Instagram and you remember my Knitflix series that I did last year, you might recognize this next pattern. It is Quinella by Anna Moore for Brooklyn Tweed. And I shared this one as a lookalike for Chris Evans's sweater that he wears in Knives Out, which is such a great movie if you haven't seen it. It's also such a gorgeous cable knit sweater. And this is a really good dupe for it. It is an all over cable work sweater, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge, but I really love this sweater and it looks so stunning in the white yarn, and it just makes me think of Handsome Chris. Now, my next all over cable knit sweater is Savin by Megan Babin for Hudson West. And you may be wondering why I put this one after Quinella. The reason I did that is because Quinella is strips of different cables all next to each other. Savin is a cable work chart where the cables intersect and intertwine to create this gorgeous central motif. I adore this sweater, but I know it will be quite a bit of work to do it. However, it is going to be so worth it in the end because it's so stunning. Now, I can't have a list of cable knit patterns without including a cable knit with a shawl collar. This is the Northridge Pullover by Valerie Hobbs for Knit Picks. I really love this one. It's not as intricate of a cable knit design as the previous two that I've mentioned, but that shawl collar is an added detail that just kind of puts this one a little higher for me on the difficulty scale, because not only are you doing this like all over front cable knit section to the sweater, you're also adding this shawl collar and there are all those little details and everything. But I just think it's gorgeous. It's something that looks like you would buy in a store. It's so gorgeous. And I really feel like this one would look really nice on a lot of different body types. And what also puts this one a little higher on the intensity scale is that it is knit flat and you have to seam it together. I do not love seaming, but for the right pattern, I would do seaming, and this is one of them. Now, I have included a few cable knit pullovers. It's time for a cable knit cardigan. And Megan Babin makes another appearance with Porter, which was also designed for Hudson and West. This one just screams grandpa cardigan to me, and I really, really love it. I know it would be intense to make this, but based on my own experiences and my own likes and dislikes, cable knit cardigans are something that just become heirloom pieces. They stick around for a long time. They tend to hold up really nicely. Cable work is something that does tend to have longevity to it compared to just stockinette, because the tightness of those cables kind of holds the yarn in place so it doesn't droop as much as it does when it's just knit stockinette. So this is something that could last a lot longer, but it's also something that looks timeless. And it can fit in any variety of situations. You could be sitting by a bonfire wearing this. You could be going out to a fancy dinner or a whiskey tasting, or maybe just going on a road trip, like sitting at the beach. There's so many places that you could wear a cable knit cardigan, and I adore this one. I just think it's so beautiful, so classy, and I just love it. Now we're into the second last section of my pattern list, and we're now diving into color work. Starting with something that's an easy form of color work, color blocking. And the first pattern that I've chosen is the Brockaway Pullover by Renee Cooling. I adore this. This is something that screams 80s sportswear, but also timeless, but also just fun 90s colors. Like, there's so much that I love about this sweater, and one of those things is that color blocking. I think it adds a really fun element to it. It's not something that I would think to put together, the yellow and the teal, but it works. I don't know how, but it does. And I really love the button up front. It does remind me of those like quarter zip pull-on jackets that we used to wear in like the 90s and everything. And it feels like this is an elevated version of it because it is a button style, it's a knit style. And I just think this is a really fun option, especially if the person you're knitting for is a more playful person. This might suit them much better than, say, a cable knit cardigan like I just showed you. So I really love this one. It also has that sportswear vibe to it, and I think it's a really fun knit, and I think this would be something that would look great on a lot of people. The shawl collars make another appearance with my next pattern, the Forest Park Cardigan by Kay Hopkins. This is such a cool pattern because other than that one stretch of color work, it's an all-over stockinette pattern. So it's a great way if you're just starting to do stranded color work. You only need to do it for that like 4-inch section, and then you're back to knitting plain stockinette with one color again. So I think this is a great option if you're just getting into that. I also love the symmetry of that colorwork pattern, how some of the trees are upright, some of them are upside down, and it just creates this beautiful, almost like woven style to the colorwork. Like this is something that I could imagine seeing on a woven blanket. And I love how it's translated to knitwear on this cardigan. The next pattern on my list is Sean's Gambier by Lindsay Inu. I hope I pronounced correctly. This one is similar in style to the Forest Parkway cardigan that I just showed. However, it includes more colorwork motifs. So if you found that one was just your speed, or maybe it's a little too easy for you, you want something a little more complicated, or maybe something that looks more traditional with the colorwork motifs, this would be the pattern for you. And I also think it's a very classic, timeless colorwork sweater that would be suitable for a lot of different styles. Now let's say you wanted a colorwork sweater, but you don't want something that is traditional. You want something totally outside the box. Active Duty by Maxim Sears for you. So this is by Max the Knitter, and he is known for creating some really awesome menswear patterns. I was tempted to include his single malt sweater in this list as well, but I feel like that one's really well known, and I chose some other lesser known textured styled patterns instead. But I had to include his Active Duty colorwork sweater because I have never seen, other than this pattern, a camouflage knit. I think that's so cool. It's really inventive. It's something that I would never have thought to replicate, but Max did, and clearly he did it well because I think this is such a cool sweater. And I think you could make it either really bold with choosing quite contrasting colors, or do what Max did in his sample, which was choose kind of congruous colors that make the color work less obvious. So it's almost like a trick of the eye. So I really like this pattern for that reason. And I like that it's outside the box. It's definitely something that you don't typically see on a knitted sweater. And I think that's what makes this a very cool pattern. This next sweater I have included simply for the fun of it, and also because Doyle loves Animal Crossing. This is the Tom Nookie sweater by Chase Harpole. And in case you don't know, it's inspired by Animal Crossing, which is a game on the Nintendo Switch. I'm only recently finding out more about different games because I was never a gamer growing up, but Doyle was, so I am getting educated on different forms of video games. But I remember he was playing this when we moved in together during the pandemic, and as a result, I got into this game. And it's also one of the only games that I've ever played where I actually can do all of the things. And I really enjoyed it. I found it very sweet. It's very cute. And I love that somebody made a sweater based on it. I included this pattern just for fun. And if you have someone in your life who loves Animal Crossing and you want to knit them an Animal Crossing sweater, you could absolutely do this pattern. Now I will say that the pattern is designed so that the leaf motif across the chest is done in intarsia, but there are notes in the pattern that say that others who have knit this pattern have done it stranded and it has worked out just as well for them in stranded color work. So if intarsia is still a little outside of your grasp, you can do this stranded as well. You'll just have to do something to work with your floats to get them nice and even across the back. This next pattern is another one that I chose simply for the fun of it. It is the Choose Your Own Adventure 2 by Sarah L. Kelly. I really love this pattern. I think those motifs are so creative. They tell a story. You know, there's the camper, there's the canoe, there's Sasquatch, you know, there's all kinds of different woodsy camping motifs. It feels very Canadian too, especially with the Sasquatch and everything. But I just love this sweater, and I really love that the sample is knit in such a punchy pair of contrasting yarns, you know, the bright white against the like bright azure teal. It's such a cool color combo, and I think it lends itself very well to the playful vibe of this pattern. And I just think this is really, really fun. And it's graded specifically to men's sizes because this is part of a set of 2 patterns by Sarah L. Kelly. She's also done a version that is graded specifically to women's bodies. So I love that if you're interested in this and you want to do matching sweaters for yourself and someone else in your life, you could totally do that with these 2 sweaters. If the all over colorwork is scaring you off and it's a little too much, there are instructions in the pattern to only include colorwork in certain sections of the sweater. So that's also part of why it's called the Choose Your Own Adventure. You can change up how much colorwork you do in the sweater. You can change up whether it is a short sleeve or a long sleeve. There's a lot of options to this sweater, which is another reason why I wanted to include it. I really loved the versatility of it. Now we're on to the final section of my pattern roundup that I am calling Most Knitworthy. Now these are patterns that have certain details or elements to them that just require a little bit of extra effort. So I believe that if you're going to knit them for somebody, that person has to be a very knitworthy person. Starting with the Coastal Zipup by Winter's Weather Knits. This is a zip-up cardigan. Now this is one that if the person you're knitting for maybe wants something that is more akin to a store-bought item such as a zip-up hoodie or even a jacket or something like that, this would be a great option for them because it doesn't really look a lot like a knitted item based on the fact that it has this zipper. But you have to insert that zipper yourself, and that is no mean feat. I haven't done a zipper myself yet. I know others have, and it's not as scary as it seems, they say. But that's another whole effort element to a sweater that I don't necessarily want to take on myself, but you might want to because it works for you or it's something that you just really, really want to make. So that's why this one is in my most knitworthy category. The next pattern on this list is the Cash by Rachel Brockman again. This one is a paid pattern though, and this one is also a zip-up sweater, but this one has the added element of texture. This one has that similar waffle knit texture to Justin's flannel that I shared earlier in the video, but this time you're knitting it flat because you're doing a zip-up sweater. And if you really feel like it, this one has the added bonus of the chest zipper as well. So not only are you doing one zipper up the front of the cardigan, you're also doing a pocket zipper as well. So that plus the stitch detail of the texture make this one a very knitworthy pattern in my mind. We're down to our penultimate pattern, which again has a zipper. Can you tell that I find inserting zippers to be an added difficulty to a pattern? But this one has more than just that makes it a very knitworthy pattern. It is the Lanarch sweater by Rebecca Clow of the Crea Bea. I adore this pattern. One day I will knit it because this is something that if this was a store-bought item, I would definitely have it in my wardrobe. It is so cozy, so comfy. I really love this style of sweater. The quarter zip is such a nice style, but I particularly love that this one has the half fisherman's rib. So half fisherman's rib is similar to brioche, but it is done in a different way. Brioche involves knitting into slipping a stitch and yarning over. The fisherman's rib is knitting into the stitch below. So in a way, you're creating the same look of a stitch, but you use different methods. So this one is one that takes a long time to knit because of that particular stitch pattern. I also think that it is a very knitworthy pattern because when you knit fisherman's rib, you have to pay extra close attention to your measurements because this is a stitch that grows. So it's going to require some extra effort on your part knitting it for somebody else because you're going to have to do a lot of measuring. So if you're looking to knit something for another person in your life as a surprise gift, this is not the pattern to do it on. However, if you are doing it for somebody and they know that you're knitting it for them and you can try it on them multiple times, this is the sweater to do it. I just love this sweater so much, and one day I will knit this, but this is something that is a very knit-worthy pattern. And here we are, the final pattern on the list, the one that I think is the most knit-worthy pattern on this list. It is the Dawn to Dust Shacket by Tiffany Ty. This is a pattern that I did include in another video. It's in my Gilmore Girls list of patterns, but the reason I wanted to include it in this one is because I think this is a stellar pattern because you are literally recreating a men's flannel button-up shirt. And I just think that's such a cool pattern to make for somebody. I think it's also a really great way to introduce someone to knitwear who maybe doesn't have any knitted items yet, because you're mimicking a flannel, which is a very comfortable, very cozy type of pattern, or type of shirt rather, to wear. And I just think this is such a beautiful pattern with so many little details to it that if you're going to knit this for somebody, they have to be a very knit-worthy person. But I just think it's such a gorgeous pattern. I had to include it in this list. And that brings us to the end of this list of size-inclusive patterns for men. I really hope you enjoyed this pattern roundup. I hope it was worth the wait. I really wanted to do a good job with this pattern roundup list because I have been promising it for a while and it's been requested for a while. And I'm so happy with the patterns that I chose for this pattern roundup. I hope you are too. And I hope if you have either a man or a masculine presenting person in your life that you maybe want to knit something for, or maybe you are a male knitter or a masculine presenting knitter and you've been looking for size inclusive patterns to knit for yourself, I really hope you found something on this list, or if you know somebody who might like this list, you can pass it on to them. And I just hope that this was a really great pattern roundup. It's one that I have been wanting to do for a while, but I wanted to do it right. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining me. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. While you're here, it would help me out if you would like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell icon to be notified whenever I have new videos. I really hope you enjoyed this video and hope you found a pattern that you like. And I hope you all take care and happy knitting!